Hello everyone, in this video we will study outbreeding devices, few more topics, and then we'll be moving towards the second event of the sexual reproduction, which is fertilization. So what are outbreeding devices? What do you mean by them? So sometimes what happens, in spite of flower being complete, means it has both staminate and pistillate, both the parts will be there, but then also self-fertilization will not occur. So in this case, if the plant has to sustain further, it has no option other than the cross-pollination. So outbreeding devices are the ones which are adopted by the plants so that they can undergo cross-pollination in spite of possessing complete flowers. So one such phenomenon is dichogamy. Dichogamy means the receptivity period for anther and stigma, it will be different. So if anthers, they are going to mature early and stigma is not receptive, self-fertilization will not occur. Similarly, if stigma will be receptive a bit early in comparison to the anthers, it will be of no use because anthers, they are not receptive, pollen, they are not ready. So how could self-fertilization occur? So this condition is known as dichogamy. It could be of two types. Protoenry means if the anthers, they will mature early, they will be in their receptive phase much earlier. And protogyny means if the female part will become receptive a bit early in comparison to the anthers. So in both the cases, self-fertilization will not happen and the plant has to go cross-pollination to maintain its generation. Another thing which could happen is heterostyle. Hetero means dissimilar. So if anthers and stigma, they are different heights. Suppose anther is this much long and stigma is this much short. So there is a probability that in this case self-fertilization will not happen. Because pollens, once they are formed, and suppose if the pollen is inclined this way, then anthers will become receptive and they will shed the pollen here. So here in this case stigma will not receive the pollen from this anther, and in this case also cross-pollination will be favored. Another reason, if self-sterility happens. So if pollen reaches the surface of stigma on the same flower, but due to certain factors, fertilization will not happen. So in case of self-sterility also, the flower is left with no other option than the cross-pollination. So in self-sterility also, this cross-pollination will happen, and of course if the flower is unisexual, then of course cross-pollination has to happen. Now we are discussing that every time if the flower is complete, then also cross-pollination is happening. I think there must be a benefit to it because everything happens for a benefit. So what are the favorable points why cross-pollination is much better? So whenever cross-pollination is there, the hybrid vigor is more. Means the seeds, they are always produced in a greater quantity than in the case of self-fertilization. Adaptability in the seeds will be more. Adaptability means the ability of the seeds to settle into any environmental conditions will be more. Now the third thing will be that disease resistant varieties will be more in number. So these are 2-3 points which you must keep in mind because they may be asked to you in the board practical also by the external examiner, and sometimes in your notes also you can write that why cross pollination is favored. What are the favorable points for it? So seeds, they will be always produced in high number, which is known as hybrid vigor. The seeds will show high adaptability. They will be settling to any environmental conditions. without any failure, and disease-resistant varieties will be more in number. Now, another important topic which we have to study is self-compatibility reaction. In this, compatibility or checkup will be done whether pollen are suitable for stigma or not. So here I have drawn stigma and we have already completed our pollination. Till now you must know that pollen, they have reached the surface of stigma. Now pollen, as they reach the surface of stigma, compatibility reaction happens wherein it will be checked that can pollen grow further. Certain chemicals will be checked, and once it will give a go, then pollen will start taking nutrients from the stigma and pollen will grow to form a pollen tube. We already know that majority of the pollens, they are released at two cell stage, wherein what is there in the pollen? One vegetative nucleus is there and one generative nucleus is there. So generative nucleus is there and vegetative nucleus is there. When this vegetative nucleus, they will not help in the sexual reproduction. But yes, this generative nucleus will do. So in the two cell stage, only vegetative nucleus and generative nucleus will be there. However, in remaining 40% of the angiospermic families, pollen is released in the three cell stage, where in the pollen tube, two male gametes are seen because this generative cell will undergo one mitotic division, as a result of which two nuclei will be formed. Now these two nuclei, they will function as male gametes and they will help in the sexual reproduction process. Now herein, if this self-compatibility reaction fails, then pollen will not be able to grow into pollen tube and there will be no fertilization at all. But if self-compatibility reaction is favored, if it has been given a go, then pollen will grow to form the pollen tube. Ultimately, pollen, if they are released at the two cell stage, they have to form in the three cell stage. Means every pollen has to form these two gametes and then only further fertilization will happen. So till now we already know that ovule was inverted and such type of ovule was known as anatropous ovule. This was our embryo sac in between, and you know that embryo sac towards the micropylar end, it contains egg and there were two nuclei enclosed in one cell, right? So we are going to start our fertilization event. In fertilization event, the meaning of the fertilization will stay as usual. Fertilization refers to the fusion of male and female gamete. Now once pollen tube it grows in the style. Here I am drawing with the purple color. It grows in the style, it reaches the ovary and then it comes inside the ovule. And you know that inside the ovule we have embryo sac. This line, purple line structure is your nucellus. This is your outer integument. This is your inner integument. Now herein we will study three possibilities which could be there. One is that pollen tube, if it is coming, it will come towards the micropylar region and inside the pollen tube, of course, two male gametes will be there. So if the entry of the pollen tube happens towards the micropylar end, then it is known as porogamy. If the pollen, it enters through the integuments in the embryo sac, and of course in this case also two male gametes will be there. If it is entering through the integuments, it will be known as mesogamy. If the pollen tube is entering from the chaliceal end. So chaliceal end is this one. So if the pollen tube is entering through the chaliceal end and carrying two male gametes, then it will be known as chalezogamy. So once pollen tube is formed, it comes in the ovary and the male gametes, they will try to get into the embryo sac. They can adopt three pathways. One will be micropyle, another will be chaliza, and third will be integuments. These terms are very, very important. So if the entry is happening through micropyle, we will use the term porogamy. So we can define porogamy as the entry of pollen tube in the embryo sac towards the micropylar end is known as porogamy. If the entry of the pollen tube is happening through the integuments, then it will be known as mesogamy. If the pollen tube is entering the embryo through the chaliceal end, then it will be known as chalezogamy. Now, pollen tube has already entered the embryo sac. It can enter through any of the three pathways. So what will happen now? We need to understand fertilization. You can see that this black structure is your embryo sac. An embryo sac contains an egg at the micropylar end. So when pollen tube it is coming through the micropyle, there are synergids on either side of the egg, and synergids internally contain filiform apparatus. So this filiform apparatus, it actually guides the pollen tube that you have to get mix or fuse with an egg. So filiform apparatus, they are present in the synergids and they guide the pollen tube where they have to fuse. Here these red cells are your male gamete. So this is one male gamete, Mg means male gamete, and this is your another male gamete. You can see here that the structure fertilization will happen. Means one male gamete will fuse with the egg, and of course both the cells will be haploid. That is why I have written small n. We use this letter whenever we want to say that half the number of chromosomes are present. So when these both gametes will fuse, it will lead to the formation of zygote. Now this zygote will be 2n in number because gametes are already haploid. When you will add half with half, it will become 1. That means the chromosome will now be in pairs. So fertilization will happen and it will lead to the making or formation of the zygote. Zygote will be the unicellular structure. Another dissimilarity which you have to notice here, that another male gamete is also fusing. It is fusing with the secondary nucleus. And the ploidy level of the secondary nucleus was n plus n because it contains two nuclei. One is this one and second is this one. So one male gamete, it will fuse with Sn means secondary nucleus. That means n plus n plus n means a structure will be formed that will known as primary endosperm nucleus. This primary endosperm nucleus is known as PEN. And that is why, because fertilization is happening twice, that is why we call it as double fertilization. This is again going to be very, very important. What is double fertilization? So study thoroughly. Double fertilization refers to the fusing of one male gamete with an egg. Its ploidy level will be 2n in the case of zygote, and fusing of another male gamete with the secondary nucleus to form primary endosperm nucleus that will form endosperm later. Thank you.